Mark. Welcome everyone to the Global Sports Channel's bonus program for the week. I'm your host David Barbash. We're going to be talking today about doping scandals in athletics, and specifically the scandal involving coach Alberto Salazar. And before we get into that, 1976, and it was the Montreal Olympics, and I was a youngster growing up in Leeds, England. And I was a big fan not only of athletics but also swimming. And there was an American swimmer called Shirley Babashoff, and she wanted to win 5 gold medals. And she had to beat the East Germans. And she thought she had enough talent to do it, to take them down. Cornelia Ender, she was going up against a formidable swimmer in a few events. And also Petra Thuma. And the East Germans were victorious in 4 of the events. Shirley had to settle for silver in 4 events, but she won gold in the relay. And she swore at that time that the only reason why she lost those gold medals, the other 4, besides the one that she won, was due down to doping and drugs. And so at that time she was branded a sore loser, a bad sport, no evidence. But later, when the Berlin Wall came down and there was no longer a separate West Germany and East Germany, Stasi documents revealed that there indeed, in the 70s and early 80s, that there had been state-sponsored a doping program sponsored by the state. And some of those performances were questionable, and it bled over to track and field. You had people like Marlies Goer, Marita Koch, who never tested positive, but they were world record holders. In fact, Marita Koch is still a world record holder to this day in the 400 meters women's world record still, and that's been more than 35 years since she's held that record. So it wasn't until 1999 that the World Anti-Doping Agency was founded, and when it came to distance running, you had the EPO was started to be tested for, I believe, in the early 90s. And EPO, which Lance Armstrong used in cycling to cheat, they were using supposedly in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and they didn't start testing for it until the early 90s, but at the Olympics they didn't start testing until 2000 in the Sydney Olympics. So before then, in the 90s, some of a lot of people were questioning some of the performances by the Moroccan athletes, some of the performances by the Kenyans. Obviously, in sprints later on, from 88 onwards, you were questioning more of the use of steroids. But in distance races, it was more of EPO, just like it was in cycling. And you didn't have to necessarily have a positive test. Balco, in recent years, in the last 15 to 20 years, we've found out that you can test a negative but still be convicted and serve a suspension, a drug suspension, because your teammates can testify against you, coaches can testify. So happened with Marianne Jones, Dwayne Chambers, association, people like John Smith were linked to the testimony with Balco, and he coached Maurice Green, the ex-world record holder in the 100 metres. Justin Gatlin, who was a star runner for Trevor Graham, coach Trevor Graham, again, the Balco scandal. John Drummond was the coach of Tyson Gay. He was convicted with steroid distribution. So it's a problem in athletics for quite a while. Let's look at the specific case of Alberto Salazar. One of my favourite athletes in the early 80s. He was the world record holder for the marathon in 81, winning the New York City Marathon in 2:08:13. He won the 82 Boston Marathon, So 81 New York City Marathon, 82 Boston Marathon, and he was a great cross-country champion for the US, and he was also a very good road runner, and 10,000 meter track runner as well. I ran against him way further back when I was a teenager, when he broke the American record in 28:04 at the Race of Americas, the Orange Bowl 10K in Miami. So he was a favourite of mine, along with Mary Decker on the women's side, and then Nike, who sponsored him in the early 80s. In the late 1990s, they helped him start up the Nike Oregon Project to really bring American distance running to another level, to try and challenge what the Kenyans were doing, what the Ethiopians were doing. And even though there was a suspicion due to some of the documentaries by the BBC and Panorama about what potentially some, again stressing some of the other athletes in Kenya were using, whether they're using EPO, they found vials. Panorama documentary crew found vials of EPO at the track. Same accusations were levelled at Ethiopians, again innocent until proven guilty. The same thing with the Jamaicans and the US sprinters. Just because you can get some athletes testing positive, and it doesn't mean that all athletes for that coach that coached these athletes that tested positive, doesn't mean that their teammates are all also taking the same drugs. So it's one of those things. You don't have to test positive to be guilty, and you don't necessarily have to have the same coach to be guilty. So let's look at the case with Alberto Salazar. So he, after 4 years after ProPublica and the BBC did a documentaries into investigations into his activities, they found that there were claims from athletes that he was prescribing or had prescribed for the athletes medications to use for training assistance, using pain medications, thyroid medications, asthma medications, and in a lot of the cases these athletes were not having abnormal levels on thyroid function. They didn't have asthmatic issues, and yet he was having these medications prescribed. Later on, he had a heart attack, I think in 2007. He did bring on Jerry Schumacher in 2008 into the Nike Oregon project to help. But EPO, for instance, wasn't tested until the year 2000 again at the Sydney Olympics. My question is, why would you subscribe thyroid medication, insist, according to one of his ex-runners, the silver medalist in 2007, Cara Goucher, testified to a panel that in October 2019 banned Alberto for 4 years due to 3 factors. One, he was recommending a higher amount than the threshold was for intravenous L-carnitine, an amino acid that can help with taking burning fat as fuel for energy. And you normally shouldn't take, if you do it in intravenous, you should normally take it in capsule form, but if you did it intravenous, you shouldn't exceed 50 milliliters of administered dosing. He was doing way beyond that, and his ex-assistant coach Steve Magnus testified to the arbitration panel that he did a Vo2 Max test in 2011 and had phenomenal results on the Vo2 Max test, and Salazar, even Magnus testified that Salazar emailed Lance Armstrong at the time and said, hey, you've got to see these results. I've only shared this with Galen Rupp, who he coached along with Sir Mo Farah Mo Farah having won the 5,000, 10,000 meters gold at London and the following Olympics. And it's maybe if he didn't know the threshold, I could understand. But when some of these athletes were questioning, like Dathan Ritzenheim, questioning him, "Coach, is this legal? Is this legal? What we're doing with the high dosage of the intravenous?" And Salazar would say, according to testimony, that no problems, everything checks out, we're fine. Number 2 allegation was he was not blocking, but he was telling them to, in a way, considered tampering. And the charge of tampering was telling your athletes, if you're asked by a drug tester if you've taken any prohibited substances, don't volunteer any information that you're taking the intravenous of the L-carnitine. So that's considered tampering with witness or an athlete. And then third and final was testosterone and the question of trafficking, the idea of, quote, trafficking testosterone. And he took a gel, testosterone gel. He had it tested on 2 of his sons. He went to Nike, asked permission to experiment, conduct an experiment in a lab on the Nike campus. And Salazar wanted to see what was the least amount of testosterone gel that would raise testosterone no higher than the threshold allowed at that time. Now, you could have said that was to see how much they could get away with in terms of doping with testosterone, but stay beneath the breaking the rules. But he asserted to Nike that it was to do that to test how much a competitive coach or athlete, if they were to try and taint his athletes by planting some testosterone gel, the other athletes, competing athletes, planted on them. Well, I don't know why they would do that, but his assertion was he was doing that to protect his athletes. Nike has stayed by his side even though he's been banned for 4 years, and we all appreciate loyalty, I understand that. But Nike, in a letter that was revealed by a ProPublica, they got a hold of a letter, and the letter read, by Mark Park, who was the CEO of Nike. He claims Nike's do the right thing still stands, and he claims that doing the right thing by staying by Salazar's side when he feels somebody who acted in good faith, he feels this is unjust, what's happening to Salazar, and he doesn't deserve the ban, according to Nike's CEO. So Nike actually has paid for his defense, and you know that Salazar's revered in Nike circles. There's a building named after him when you go to that campus, the Beaverton campus, Nike campus, and they obviously started the Nike Oregon project because of under Alberto Salazar. Since that's been dissolved, now there is no longer a Nike Oregon project, but there are other training groups up there at the Beaverton campus, and Nike are sponsoring that team. But make your own decisions, I think the World Anti-Doping Agency needs to get stronger with its testing, with its enforcement. Something good came out. Mark Philpott, our host, mentioned this a couple of weeks ago about Travis Tygart and US anti-doping agency sending a bill for President Trump, Donald Trump, to sign the bill into effect. And that's a bill that will, when the US athletes are competing against foreign competition, making sure that it's a level playing field, providing stronger jail time and fines for coaches and traffickers of banned substances, essentially. Athletes are not part of that rule, and I'm disappointed to see that, but at least it's a start. But you need to stay ahead of the people that are breaking the rules. Balco showed that with the clear that they can get around the system. But let's hope that they can start catching up with the violators and the cheats, and let's try and create more and more of a level playing field, even if technology takes it the other way anyway. So have a great week, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. There is no finish line, and be compassionate. Do a great deed for your fellow human beings out there today, and family is number one. Take care. Have a great one. See you soon.